The cradle of civilization, the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia, and the culture of the ancient Near East. One of the main themes we've encountered in art is the idea of culture as a learned behavior, and how this is tied to the idea of widespread settlement, writing, and the rule of law, what we often refer to as the urban revolution. Today, we turn our attention to the urban revolution of Mesopotamia, where people, after switching from a life of hunting and gathering, turn their attention to intensive agriculture. As a result, these settlements need central governments to help them organize their labor, to store their resources, as well as systems of writing to help them record them. Some of the earliest forms of writing were cuneiform tablets invented in order to keep track of beer. One of the earliest civilizations to emerge, around the 4th millennium BCE, is Sumer, a group of independent city-states that included Eridu, Larsa, Sippur, Uruk, Lagash, Nippur, Akkad, and Ur. A non-Semitic people, these Sumerians began to transform the lowland valleys along the Tigris-Euphrates into areas rich in grain that soon gave rise to ever-growing urban expansion. The emergence of temple-centered cities run by theocratic leaders and populations reaching over 10,000. The Sumerians were also some of the first to produce great literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh, for example, precedes Homer's great epic, the Iliad, by some 1,500 years. With the birth of visual art in prehistory and now writing, we're looking at the arrival of culture, the ability of humans to create complex narratives and give a voice to abstract thought. Here are some terms that you probably get to know. Urban revolution. This refers to the rise of cities and city-state governments needed to help allocate and manage resources. Kingship, or the idea of the king. Is he a priest king? Is he divine? How are these ideas consolidating in Mesopotamia? Writing, using cuneiform tablets, is a form of record keeping, but also as a possible source of oral transmission. Votives, or votive statues. These are artifacts that are given as thank you or peace offerings to the gods, or sometimes as stand-ins for worshippers. Cylinder seals. Sometimes these are personal marks of individuals, merchants, kings, and they contain visual narratives when rolled out on a piece of clay, but they can be worn around the neck as jewelry. The concept of religion. What does this include? Are kings religious leaders? Are they only priests? Who's in charge? Who's in power? The idea of patronage. Who's paying for various monuments to be built? Is it the city? Priests? A king? Ziggurats. These are raised platforms on which a temple may sit. The idea of hieratic scale. This is treating one particular figure as larger than everyone else and taking center stage in a composition. Registers. As we've seen in Paleolithic art, many scenes are shown on a ground line. But here, we have consistent ground lines showing up on various artifacts. Each of these registers contains different scenes. Frontal versus profile views. We've seen in our Paleolithic examples lots of profile views of bison, of deer. But here, we will also see some frontal views of figures facing the viewer and interacting. Here's a list of the various civilizations we will be studying in this segment. The Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Hittites and Kassites and Elamites, the Assyrians, the Neo-Babylonians, the Achaemenids and Persians, and finally the Sasanians. The idea of the city-state has its origins in Sumerian culture, where actions that were once individual become institutionalized in service of the state. And one of the greatest examples of this can be found at the site of Uruk, in the Anu ziggurat and its crown jewel, the White Temple. The design of the ziggurat is simply a raised platform constructed on mud brick. Built sometime in the 4th millennium BCE and towering over 40 feet, the White Temple would have dominated the surrounding flat plains of the city and could be seen for miles away. Dedicated to the sky god Anu, the ziggurat and its temple would not only have provided a nexus for the city, but also a strong political statement of theocratic power, as the god and his priests rule high above the city. Visitors can see processioners from miles away, slowly winding their way up the man-made mountain to pay tribute to the god. Scientists estimate that it would have taken 1,500 laborers working 10 hours a day for 5 years to have completed the temple. Measuring 15.5 by 22.3 meters, the temple was aligned along cardinal points. It had 3 entrances, none of which could be accessed directly from the ramp. Instead, visitors would have needed to walk around the temple, taking in its imposing whitewashed walls. Within, they would have entered a long hall, and at the far end, an altar. Modern archaeologists have uncovered a series of chambers along either side of the central hall, which were equipped with shelves, possibly used to house cult objects. Staircases have been discovered at the northwest and east corners. At the far end of the central hall stood a staircase and an altar. At the foundation layer, archaeologists have discovered ritually deposited objects, such as the bones of a lion and a leopard. Around the same time the Sumerians are developing architecture, they're also experimenting with sculptural forms. This stunningly realistic piece, often referred to as the Mask of Warka, is a perfect example. Discovered in 1939 in the Inanna district of Uruk, it represents the first known accurate depiction of the human head. Carved from marble, it measures 8 inches tall, the average height of a human head. Some scholars believe that it may represent Inanna, the goddess of love, passion, justice, war, and may have once been attached to a wooden cult statue. It may have had shells in place of eyes, or possibly a fine stone known as lapis lazuli, a blue stone, or some other gemstone for the pupils. The intriguing biography of this artifact, however, does not end with the Sumerians. In 2003, during Operation Desert Storm, it was looted from its home in Baghdad, but later recovered by Marine Reserve Colonel Matthew Bogdanos. Acting on a tip, he recovered the pilfered piece, undamaged, which had been buried in the backyard of a local farmer. A happy ending to a very long tale. A hoard of 12 statues discovered at nearby Tel Asmar would have served a distinctly different purpose. 10 are male and 2 female, and range in height from 21 centimeters to 72 centimeters. 8 of the figures are carved from gypsum, 2 from limestone, and 1, the smallest, is made from alabaster. Of the 12, 11 are shown in standing positions supported by rounded bases. Only 1 appears to be kneeling. The males are all shown bare-chested, wearing kilts adorned with various patterns, and adorned with long hair and black stylized beards. 1 appears to be bald and clean-shaven. One common feature they all share are abnormally large eyes, made from inlays of white shell and black limestone. There is even 1 set with a pair of eyes made from lapis lazuli, possibly made in place using bitumen. The women are all shown with long robes and 1 shoulder exposed. At least 1 child sculpture was found as well. Most of the sculptures have their heads tilted upwards, possibly waiting for the vision of a god to appear before them. They were all discovered at the temple of Abu, another god of fertility, and believed to have been placed on benches or along walls as votive statues. Some bear inscriptions, such as the one who offers prayers, and possibly represent surrogates of worshippers. There are some subtle differences. For example, variation in what the statues are holding. Some are shown offering cups, some birds, one a statue with a statue bust. These are all consistent with what we know of votive offerings. Hundreds of cups have also been discovered at this site. Found within the Inanna temple complex at Uruk, the Warka vase offers us vital information on Sumerian religious practices. The sculptor has divided the vase into 3 distinct bands. Figures process along the carved alabaster vase along a clear ground line. Reading from top to bottom, the lowest band consists of ewes and rams, male and female sheep, meant to represent the fertility the goddess Inanna would have brought to the region. Along the central band, we have a procession of nude men, wide-eyed, carrying baskets filled with the bounty of the land, being brought to the goddess as a votive offering. These figures represent a conceptual rather than optical view. If they were strictly profile, it would be hard to interpret with the eye. The stride is communicated. The topmost band depicts a large female figure with a horned headdress receiving a basket of offerings that will undoubtedly be deposited in the shrine of the goddess. Although she is larger than the man before her, the female figure may be Inanna or, perhaps, her own priestess. To the far right, we catch a glimpse of a partially clothed man, the only one. Again, he is shown slightly larger, perhaps indicating his role as the priest-king of Inanna. We call this difference in size hieratic scale, that is, emphasizing the role of an individual based on the centrality in the composition as well as the size in relation with other figures. The ritual pictured here may perhaps stand for a symbolic marriage between the priest-king and the goddess, indicating a sort of rejuvenation of the land. And now we travel southeast to the city of Ur. Discovered in one of the largest of the royal graves at Ur, this wooden box was believed by its excavator Leonard Woolley to have been mounted atop a pole and carried as a standard, hence its name. Other scholars have suggested it must have been a sound box for a musical instrument. When discovered, the standard lay all but in ruins. The wooden frame had totally disintegrated. The bitumen melted away, leaving a bric-a-brac puzzle of shell, red limestone, and lapis lazuli. Therefore, what we're looking at represents a modern reconstruction based on scholarly guesswork. 2 main panels survive. Each highlights values associated with kingship. The war panel is separated into 3 registers, each stacked above the other, and highlights the Sumerian king's power. The bottommost register shows chariots manned by charioteers and soldiers, and pulled by donkeys that trample the fallen bodies of their enemies. The middle panel shows cloaked soldiers at left, carrying axes, with the enemy stripped of their armor, marching before them. Finally, the upper register continues the line of captured enemies as they're paraded before a figure appearing larger than the most, possibly a king. Again, we call this treatment of this figure hieratic scale. On the reverse, we have 3 registers once again, but the theme here is switched from one of war to one of fertility, growth, and redistribution of wealth. In the bottommost register, we find individuals hauling sacks of grain and accompanied by donkeys. In the middlemost register, we have individuals walking with rams and animals that look like they could provide wool for clothing and textiles. At the topmost register, we find what appears to be a court scene, with a musician strumming a lyre and various individuals seated, toasting a larger-than-life figure who holds a beaker, possibly a king. From the grave of Queen Puabi comes the stunning bull-headed lyre. The bull's head in front of the sound box is covered with gold leaf. The eyes are precious lapis lazuli in shell, and the hair and beard are lapis lazuli as well. The panel on the front of the lyre is decorated with shelled plaques set in bitumen, or what we refer to as pitch. The top panel shows a master of animals scene, with a god or possibly a hero figure known as Lamu, hairy, wearing a belt and wrestling two human-headed bulls. The panel below this shows a hyena and a lion, both of which assume human-like postures. They appear to be carrying items for a banquet. The hyena, with a knife in his belt, brings in a table laden with animal parts, while the lion carries a large jar and a cup. The cup carried by the lion is identical to vessels of silver and copper alloy found from other graves in the royal cemetery. In the register below this appears to be an ass playing a lyre with a bull's head, the same type as the lyre itself. A standing bear seems to steady the lyre, and the little seated animal rattles the sistrum. In the bottom register, a scorpion man holds unidentified objects in his hands. Behind him appears a gazelle carrying two beakers that are similar to the gold and electrum and silver tumblers from Queen Puabi's tomb. One of the items we mentioned in Queen Puabi's accoutrements is a cylinder seal, and this is a small, round cylinder, typically around 2 to 3 centimeters in length, engraved with written characters or figurative scenes, or both. And these were used in ancient times to roll an impression onto a two-dimensional surface, usually clay. Another wonderful example of a cylinder seal is this one from Auric that shows a priest-king feeding sacred sheep. Again, this may recall images of that ram in a thicket statuette that we've seen earlier. In 2334 BCE, the loosely linked group of cities known as Sumer in southern Mesopotamia came under the yoke of Sargon of Akkad, who came from northern Mesopotamia. This stunning life-size bronze head of a king may represent Sargon himself, with a stylized wig helmet usually attributed to kings. The material, bronze, not only represents a material that is solid like stone, but also the mastery of metallurgy, and thus Sargon is seen as a master of technology. The long, graceful locks and wrinkled brow may represent, to many, years of wisdom. The eyes, either vandalized or simply removed, may once have been adorned with precious stones. Sargon's grandson, Naram-Sin, called himself the King of the Four Quarters, and the stele of Naram-Sin carries a slightly different message to viewers: absolute military victory and religious power. The focus of the stele is Naram-Sin himself, who appears as a god-hero king with his horned helmet. He is larger than life size, at hieratic scale once again. And in this depiction, his nearness to the gods is highlighted, who appear above him as stars. He tramples over the slain bodies of his enemies, the Gutii or Lulubians, mountain folk. One has a spear through his throat, while the other begs either for clemency or a quick death. Naram-Sin approaches a mountain, perhaps a sacred site where he can communicate with the gods. Similar iconography appears in the Narmer palette in Egypt. This stele would have been displayed publicly. At one time, it was captured by a rival city and displayed as a spoil of war. In ancient times, if the depiction of a king was present, it is possible that the king was present And so in capturing the stele, one commands the power of the king. One of the largest and best preserved ziggurats of Mesopotamia is the Great Ziggurat at Ur. Also excavated by Leonard Woolley, it was constructed with 3 levels of terraces, standing originally 70 to 100 feet high. 3 monumental staircases lead up to a gate at the first terrace level. Next, a single staircase rises to a second terrace, which supported a platform on which a temple and the final and highest terrace stood. The ziggurat at Ur and the temple on its top were built around 2100 BCE by the king of that time, Ur-Nammu, of the 3rd dynasty. And it was built for the moon god Nana, the divine patron of the city-state. The lower level of the ziggurat was constructed of over 720,000 individual baked bricks, a true testament to the power of the Sumerian state. Unfortunately, Ur-Nammu never got to see the end of his project. It was finished by his son Shulgi, who enjoyed a long and lasting reign. Another notable ruler during the Neo-Sumerian period was Gudea of Lagash, who was noted for his extreme piety. Gudea believed in giving the gods their due. His surviving portraits typically show him clean-shaven, wearing a wool-brimmed cap, with his hands clasped together, possibly in prayer. Interestingly, all the portraits used diorite, a rare stone that had to be imported. As a matter of fact, an inscription at the base of one of his statues claims, "This statue has not been made of silver, nor lapis lazuli, nor from copper, nor lead, nor bronze, but of diorite." Gudea's use of diorite not only sets him apart from his predecessors, but shows he has the power to acquire and negotiate rare resources for his people. This second statue of Gudea from Girsu shows the ruler seated on a throne with his hands clasped together, and in his lap he's holding a temple plan. If you were to compare this portrait with that of Naram-Sin, you would clearly see the difference between the two leaders. One, Naram-Sin, being a militaristic leader who ruled by tyranny, and Gudea, one who is a builder. During the 18th century BCE, we begin to see the resurrection of the kingdom of Sumer and its mighty kings. Among these, Hammurabi, who establishes a centralized government and rules from the city of Babylon. While Hammurabi was known as a conqueror, he was also a great lawgiver and was one of the first to publicize his law code. Hammurabi's law code defines the penalty for everything from murder to theft to infidelity. Made of basalt, this stele shows a relief of Hammurabi and the flame-shouldered sun god Shamash, whom he greets with a raised hand as a sign of respect. Shamash is shown handing him a scepter, a symbol or the iconography for the right to rule. Curiously, this artist has decided to depict Shamash in partial side view. The horns of his crown are shown in profile, but the body and beard, with diagonal lines, appear at an angle. It's almost as though the artist is making an attempt at foreshortening. Below the figures, you see Hammurabi's code. After the fall of Babylon to the Elamites, a new power was growing. The fearsome Assyrians, whose mighty empire would extend from their capital at Assur, the name of their god, all the way to the Nile River and the Persian Gulf. The unfinished palace of Sargon II shows just how ambitious these Assyrian kings were. The city, defended by a massive defense wall and lined with watchtowers, protected a palace that stood on an elevated mound 50 feet high, covering 25 acres, with over 200 courtyards and rooms. Behind the main courtyard, we find the quarters of the king. All visitors would have had to enter through the main gate and the courtyard, which was decorated with giant figures of the king and his courtiers. Standing watch at the gates of the city are several monstrous guardians called lamassu. These winged, man-headed bulls serve to protect the king. The sculptor presents these statues in both frontal and profile view. Notice the 5 legs. When one moves from the front to the sides to pass between them, they get a sense of motion. The labor needed to construct and move these statues was captured in several reliefs also at the palace. The protection of such creatures highlights the power of the king to draw on forces beyond those of mere mortals, and again points to the favor of the gods. Assyrian kings also commissioned narrative reliefs to help chronicle their conquests, as well as helping exalt their power and piety. This first one, from the north palace of Assurbanipal at Nineveh, shows enemy soldiers trying to storm the palace using inflatable animal skins. Think of them as modern-day Navy SEALs. One of these intruders has been hit by an arrow in the back. The palace, in the distance, has been compressed, and here the main actors, the enemy intruders, and the Assyrian archers, are enlarged to help show their importance in this conquest. This second relief shows the many pursuits of the king, including hunting noble animals such as lions, the king of the beasts. Lions, of course, are noted for their courage, and here we see a lion leaping at the king, already having been struck by an arrow. He is the last among a host of slaughtered prey. Is the lion merely a beast or an analog for the enemy king, who in the eyes of the Assyrians is a mere beast? The sculptor emphasizes the tenseness of the scene with tense muscles, gaping jaws. The relief also provides a lot of evidence of how chariot warfare may have worked in the ancient world. As we can see, the king is firing his bow, while his attendants drive the chariot and keep his back. Some scholars have even used this kind of scene to explain chariot warfare and Homer's Iliad. Eventually, because of many rebellions in nearby kingdoms and overextension of resources, the Syrian Empire falls, and in its wake, a new Babylonian empire rises. Babylon, famous for its hanging gardens and enormous ziggurat, the city rises to become one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Here we see the wondrous Ishtar Gate, with its arched opening flanked by towers, with blue glazed bricks adorned with the molded and painted reliefs of real and imaginary animals. For example, Marduk's dragon and Adad's bull. Lining the processional way up to the gate were also reliefs of Ishtar's sacred lion. This recalls earlier depictions of lion guardians, such as at the Lion Gate at Hattusha, a Hittite city in Anatolia, or here at the ancient site of Mycenae in Greece. Alas, mighty Babylon is captured in the 6th century BCE by Cyrus of Persia, who claims ancestry from the mythical king Achaemenes. The kingdom of Egypt also falls to the Achaemenids in 525 BCE, and only the resistance of the Greeks kept what we would call the Persians from dominating all of Western Europe and Anatolia. Cyrus's successors, Darius I and Xerxes, ruled from an administrative complex at the city of Persepolis, built from 521 to 565 BCE. The palace was laid atop a mighty platform and approached from a gateway called the Gate of All Lands. This broad ceremonial staircase provided access to the platform and wide audience hall called the Abadana. Here, you see the king being addressed by various dignitaries. The reliefs capture representatives from over 23 subject or vassal nations, each bearing tribute to the king, and each with their own specific dress, which provides archaeologists with an almost ethnographic account. Unlike Assyrian relief figures, these forms are shown more rounded. What's amazing is traces of color have been detected that help us reconstruct the colorful procession of figures that once adorned this mighty staircase. Alas, Persepolis falls beneath the might of Alexander the Great, whose men, it was rumored, set fire to the capital in revenge for the sack of Athens in 480 BCE. And here is an example. The region was then divided up among Alexander's generals, such as Seleucus. Note that the sculptor eventually decreased it to the Romans, known as repose. In the 3rd century, taking a single sheet of metal, power rises once again from behind that of the Sasanians. The sculptor then can engrave their predecessors' specific claimed heredity, such as from lines of Achaemenid kings, and even add mercury gilding. Here, lending a sense of regalness and color to this particular portrait. In conclusion, we have seen the rise in civilization, urban life, invention of writing, and the birth of empire in the Near East. Sumerians built the first monumental temples to the gods, followed by the Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Persians, and Sasanians, who continue the tradition of monumental art and architecture, but with a slight shift to rulers and art that record their victories, their law codes, and eventually challenges the West for supremacy over the Mediterranean. Eventually, these same traditions will not be lost, but will become part of the legacy that is Islam.